Ladies and gentlemen, are you believing happy lies? On the last podcast we did with my friend Melissa Dougherty, she pointed out that even people in the church are preaching things that are anti-biblical against the Bible, yet they sound really good. They come from a group of beliefs called New Thought. Not New Age. There's some similarity, but New Thought. And in the last podcast, which aired on the American Family Radio Network, and you can hear wherever you hear podcasts, you're listening to this right now, just go back one episode. You'll probably want to listen to that episode before you begin to listen to this one, because we're going to assume some basic knowledge about New Thought that we covered in the last podcast. We're not going to rehash fully here, but I will start by asking Melissa, my guest, give our listeners just a broad overview of some of the beliefs of New Thought, and then we're going to dive into some specific teachers out there who are saying they're Christian preachers, but they're actually teaching New Thought doctrine opposite the Bible, or at least disagreeing with the Bible. So, Melissa, give us an overview of New Thought. What are some of the beliefs they have?
Sure. Inherent beliefs of New Thought. The origins are more Gnostic, which is important to remember. You have law of attraction, a manifestation, power of thoughts. Thoughts are things. Power in words. You have prosperity and health and wealth teachings, which are unique to New Thought, which we can go over later. Christ consciousness, affirmations, abundance mindset. You're a co-creator with God. Vibrations, frequencies, a misuse of science, quantum mechanics, and things like that. So that's just a basic, brief overview of things that would be more tied to the New Thought movement.
Okay, in the last podcast, you talked about Robert Schuller. He's since passed on. He was a pastor in Garden Grove, California, say back in the 70s, 80s, that time frame. And you say that he influenced some current day preachers with some of this New Thought theology. Who are those people and what are they teaching?
Sure. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's necessarily New Thought theology. It was maybe methods. And if there was theology, I'd probably have to go a little bit deeper on that. But yeah, Robert Schuller, he's a New Thought pastor who was greatly influenced by Norman Vincent Peale. Norman Vincent Peale was a very well-known New Thought positive thinking pastor who, I mean, I think even Donald Trump, when he was young, that was his pastor, you know? And so, I mean, there's an element of the thread of influence that Peale had, and Schuller was one of them. In fact, Schuller started out awfully orthodox. He started out with a reformed mindset in that regard. And he started realizing that, you know, people aren't coming to church as much as I want them to. How do I get them coming? You know, because this theology stuff is just kind of boring. And so he started, I'm simplifying it. There's more in the book. But he was influenced by the writings of Dale Carnegie, who is a New Thought writer, and Norman Vincent Peale. And he adopted especially a lot of Peale's beliefs and methods. And one of them was something he called possibility thinking. And he started changing everything about his theology. I quote him a few times in the chapter that I write about, where he's talking about the inherent goodness of humanity. In fact, self-esteem, in other words, was kind of the gospel. He was there to teach people about possibility thinking, like positive thinking about the worth of themselves, which think of like a Joel Osteen before Joel Osteen. Okay. I mean, you're talking about a positive thinking pastor, and New Thought is the positive thinking movement. And so you had these beliefs and these doctrines that sounded really good. And I'm very surprised that more pastors of that time who were pretty orthodox didn't see this and think, oh, that's a red flag. I mean, we're talking basic Christianity things like, the inherent goodness of Christianity, like that's your gospel. We shouldn't feel shame. These are things that they should have known was a little bit odd. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of those things where I want to be careful where I'm not completely overarching and overreaching to men that were mentored by Schuller, because I can't really suggest that they adopted a lot of his beliefs, But there are red flags there and things that we have to talk about. And in my chapter, I mentioned Bill Hybels, and then the other two people that I think people would recognize that he mentored and had an effect on were Rick Warren and John C. Maxwell. And a lot of people have great respect for these men. John Maxwell, he's a great leadership teacher. He even talks about not Norman Vincent Peale, Napoleon Hill. He takes a lot of Napoleon Hill stuff and applies it into what he teaches in like mastermind groups, for example. That's a very Napoleon Hill thing. Napoleon Hill is a New Thought author. And so there's levels there of nuance that I think that, hey, we kind of need to talk about this and figure this out. Like maybe this could be on our radar, but also understand that this is not a declaration of heretic, it's, you know what I mean? I think that there's that, but the most problematic thing I think about Schuller that bleeds into everything about how we do church today is that he is the father, or one of the church growth movement. And so the questions I ask are how much of his New Thought beliefs influenced him, the intention for him to create this and to do this and to grow a church. Because what he would do is that he would go door to door in his neighborhood, knock on the door and ask people, are you going to church? Not if they're Christian, not if they believe the gospel. Do you go to church? And if they said yes, didn't matter what church they were going to, he's like, great, keep going. And then if they said no, he'd ask them why. And they would say, well, I can't wear jeans to church, or I don't like this. I don't like the talk of hell. I don't like the talk of sin. I don't like this. I don't like that, whatever. And he noted it. Okay. And so he made a marketing model, and again, I'm simplifying this, but basically there was a strategy in getting that information, not to get people the gospel, but to get them to church. Right. And it worked. Like it really worked. One person, I can't remember who it is, but I quote it in my chapter. What Schuller did, like what Disney did for amusement parks is what Schuller did for churches, and so you're talking about, and I'm going to go on record and say that not everything about that is bad. I actually think that there's some wisdom in understanding your audience and understanding the people that you are with and preaching to. I think that there's the nuance in every single chapter I wrote. There had to be nuance because you can take things that are inherently fine and good and correct about what Schuller's motives were and think, all right, there's something there, right? And we can have a conversation around it. But my issue is that, okay, well, how much good is this doing? Because I'm positive. I think to some degree of certainty, I could say that a lot of people that are listening right now know exactly what all the problems are that we have within this movement without me even saying anything. And I think that is the conversation we need to have. Like, what is influencing that? Why are we doing that? Where does this come from? How much of Schuller and his New Thought beliefs are kind of squeaking through, and that is influencing how we're doing church and how we're getting people through the door. And so, I mean, that's kind of the squeaky conversation that we need to have there, that I think a lot of people kind of squirm in their seat about. But
well, this has been going on a while because Hank Hanegraaff, who's here in Charlotte, I've known Hank for many years. He's the Bible Answer Man.
Yeah.
Way back in, I want to say 1993, wrote a book called Christianity in Crisis.
Yes.
And it had to do with really what we could now call these new thought doctrines seeping into the church, mostly in the prosperity gospel vein. And I remember him saying something like this: I find Peale appalling and Paul appealing. Because Norman Vincent Peale, being one of these positive thinking pastors that wants to overlook sin and wants to not talk about the hard things that need to be talked about for people to be saved, that was appalling. Where Paul, the Apostle Paul, was appealing.
Yeah.
Because he was speaking the truth. And I've talked about this on the program before, too. One of the problems, I think, with this seeker-sensitive model is that we wind up preaching to audiences what they want to hear rather than what they need to hear.
Yes.
And we never then talk about the hard issues. And in many cases, even though it's all well-intended, people don't get saved because they don't repent of the sin that's never talked about.
Yeah.
Right.
And I did a lot of interviews again for this chapter, and it was
Hmm.
actually really hard to find anybody that was pro seeker friendly. A lot of people, in other words, had been hurt by it,
Mm,
and they've seen behind the curtain. Okay, they
right.
know they know what goes on, and they know what the decisions are made, and in what spirit they are made. And that's what gets confusing, because you're told you're doing it for God, like the excellence, like strive to be excellent and all these things. But they knew something was wrong, but they just couldn't figure it out, And I'm not here to say that all these churches are, heretical. I mean, that's not my argument here. Again, this is ecclesiology. However, some would disagree with me. In fact, one person I did do an interview for in this chapter was a former pastor of a seeker church. And one thing he said was so good, and it made so much sense, is that the problem that it creates is a perpetual merge lane. You never actually merge. Like, you're always there. It's an inch high and a mile wide. You don't
Hmm.
actually grow in scripture. And so what happens is that your back door is as big as your front. Yeah, people are coming, but they don't stay. And that's the issue, is that it's this big, huge, just sift of people always coming in. But what you got to do to get them through the door, you got to keep doing. And I
Hmm.
mean, I think it's time to have a conversation about it, because you have people that go to these churches that they don't
They
they
never
don't
grow.
understand the
They
gospel.
never get sanctified. Even Bill
Mhm.
Hybels admitted that. He said, we didn't make disciples.
He came on record, and
Hmm.
I mean, this is a well-known video, that he said that he knew exactly what the problem was, and, tried to rectify it. But that's kind of the idea, is that after that was, they were like the prototype. Okay. And now here we are all these years later, and there's still something not working with it. And that's just the seeker model. You mentioned prosperity pastors before. There's this element of a cross section of the prosperity preaching with this model that's kind of a double whammy, if you will, because then you have this model, which is, yeah, it might work. Like, people might get through the door, and some churches do a really good job of contextualizing the gospel in these spaces. People do get saved in these churches. I have a whole pros and cons section in the chapter about, the good and the bad, or I wouldn't even say good and bad, the challenges and the strengths is how I would put that.
Well, you can,
And
as I said before, you can sometimes get a good result from a bad process.
yes, yeah, and
That
God's
can happen.
providence is real.
Yeah, that doesn't mean you ought to continue the bad process. So, who are some of the people you talk about, and in terms of pastors, so our listeners can be aware when they hear
Mm.
these people? You might want to be very, very aware that what they're telling you might not be true. It might be a new age thought. Who are some of the
Mhm.
people you mentioned in the book, chapter 8 of Happy Lies?
Yeah, so I'm going to go over a few names, even some that I
Okay.
didn't mention in the book.
Okay.
Chapter 8 is about the Word of Faith movements.
Hmm.
And this is probably the most, I want to say, researched chapter in this regard, because the Word of Faith movement is, let me put it this way: if I could have New Thought, the Pentecostal movement in the 1800s, and the Mind Cure movement, or the Faith Cure movement in the 1800s, if they could all have a baby, it would be the Word of Faith movement. Okay,
Okay.
so people who say that the Word of Faith movement is inherently New Thought are wrong. Are wrong. There's actually some orthodox things in the Word of Faith movement, and I think we can see them. But again, with the cookbook analogy that I gave you in our last podcast, you're signing up for this, not realizing there's a whole other set of beliefs that are undergirding what you are believing. And I couldn't explain why a lot of the New Thought beliefs that I was believing, which I didn't realize were New Thought, I thought they were New Age, sounded the same exact thing, like the same exact way in the church, in these churches. And people like Joel Osteen, I loved listening to Joel. I was like, man, this guy gets it. He understands, and he understands the positive,
This is when you were a new
life-changing.
thought person.
Oh,
Yeah, you,
yes.
you love
Joel.
Joel. Why? What did he
I
say?
loved him because he was the positive thinking pastor. He
Hmm.
was Robert Schuller on steroids. I mean, he got it. He understood. I'm saying that this is how I understood him to be at the time. That he preached a positive message. And that is what we need to hear. We don't need to be hearing all this negative stuff about, hell and sin. And it's like, oh, bleh. All you fundamental Christians, you guys are just too negative. You're too cynical. We don't want to hear that. We want to hear this other message.
Stop
Okay.
being negative about me being negative.
Stop being
I've had
negative
it.
about, I'm not a bad person. I'm a good person. And so there was an allure there with him because, and I didn't realize exactly his ties to New Thought. His father, John Osteen, which I did not know a lot about until this research, had direct ties to the Unity movement. That made perfect sense to me, which Unity movement, by the way, is a New Thought denomination. I watched a documentary about New Thought, and there's a whole section they had about Joel Osteen. And I was sitting there just floored that even they see it. They understood that Joel Osteen is a New Thought pastor who just waves around a Bible. But what he really is this New Thought preacher. Everything he's saying, a lot of things he'll throw in they said that he'll throw in some fundamentalism to make us all happy. But in essence, he is a New Thought pastor.
Okay, so what would be, say, 2 or 3 of the teachings he repeats over and over again?
Let's just take his famous book, The Power of I Am. Let's just talk about that.
He has a book called, I know he had Your Best Life Now. He has a book called The Power of I Am.
I actually have it right here.
Are you kidding me?
No, that's amazing.
I didn't know that.
That's incredible. What else do I have up here? Yes. Look, see, The Power of I Am.
For those of you listening, we're on the YouTube channel right now, and you can see, you don't want to see it, but there it is. Joel Osteen, The Power of I Am.
I'm surprised you don't know about it.
So for our listeners who didn't hear the first podcast, he believes that we can become gods.
No.
Joel doesn't?
No, I don't think he would say that. And see, here's the thing. This is where it gets... He would say that we have, okay, remember the list I gave you earlier? There's a spectrum here, and I was in this spectrum. I would have considered myself a little bit more Christian on the spectrum than somebody who would be a little bit more secular, maybe. Mm-hmm. And so again, because remember, I became a Christian at 16, and these things just sounded Christian, and so I started adopting them, never actually having the satisfaction of understanding them completely. I do not think that Joel would inherently say, "Oh, we're gods." However, okay. There's a section in my book. I go over what I do in this chapter is I draw the lines back to where this got started. Okay. How did this even get into the church? What made the Word of Faith movement what it is today? And why does it sound so much like New Thought? That bugged me for so long. And then I did the research. And so you go back into the history of it. And then I draw these specific lines because it gets really tricky because some of it is orthodox. I guarantee you somebody has gone to a Joel Osteen sermon and maybe they've heard the gospel and got saved. But that does not then mean kind of what you said earlier. I mean, a drunk dude told me the gospel. Does that then verify the fact that he is perfectly fine? Jehovah's Witnesses were the catalyst that got me out of New Age thought. Does that mean that what they believe is orthodox? Those are the questions we have to ask. And so when people hear a truth somewhere, it for them sometimes think it equates to, oh, they're great, they're fine. Mm-hmm. This to me then verifies that they're valid. That, and so that's just wrong thinking. I think that there's an analysis there that could be a different conversation. But no, there are lines that draw back. And one of the lines that is the little gods doctrine. This is one that is so disturbing to me because it's the inherent. It is that is the common denominator of why they believe in the fashion in which they do, that your words have power. You're a co-creator with God. You have the power of your thinking and in your mind. You can bring things from the spiritual realm into the physical realm. Everything I just said to you is a New Thought belief that we went over in the last conversation. These are things that are transferred over into Word of Faith and health and wealth. The reason why you deserve, it's your birthright to be healthy and wealthy. Because in the spiritual realm, that's where the perfection is, right? Like you can bring that forth into the physical realm. When you become a Christian, in other words, for them, that's what makes it unique in the Word of Faith movement is when you become a Christian, these are things that belong to you. And New Thought, they would say it belongs to everybody. Okay. But let me go back to Little God's Doctrine. It's such an interesting chapter. I really enjoyed writing this, but the Little God's Doctrine is not something they would say out loud, very loud anymore. In fact, I think the biggest proponent for it would have been Kenneth Hagin and Kenneth Copeland. And Copeland, just watching any level, and I'm sorry, I don't know how else to say this, but he is he gives me secondhand embarrassment when I watch him. I am very confused how anybody could fall under his spell, but he was the biggest proponent of the little gods doctrine, which basically said that we are in the same class as God, okay, as human beings. Because you are in the same class as God, you should be able to create as God creates. You have the same power to create as God, okay? And that's just a little bit of what that means. So if we're taking that belief, it has to apply to Joel Osteen's theology. And it has to make sense on why you can even use the words I am to bring forth anything. He's saying there's power in I am. And that is not a concept that comes from the Bible. Joel Osteen is taking a new thought message and Christianizing it. This is like the founder.
And he's written an entire book on it.
Oh, he's written many books, Frank. Man, we got to get you in the know.
But an entire book on this false doctrine. But he wouldn't say that we can become gods, even though he's calling it the I am.
No, they will not say that out loud. They know how controversial it is, Frank. Okay, so that's the thing is that you even Copeland, okay, would shy away. I mean, he's the most outrageous of them all, in my opinion, and even he has shied away. But he has said it. Benny Hinn, Creflo Dollar. This is a undeniable, cannot get away from doctrine in the Word of Faith movement, and it does go all the way back to the inception of it. All of this started with Kenneth Hagin. But Kenneth Hagin was influenced by a man named Kenyon, E.W. Kenyon. Okay,
it's in the book, Happy Lies, chapter 8.
Yes, and E.W. Kenyon was not a Pentecostal. He was very popular in Pentecostal circles, though. They loved what he had to say. But I think he was like a Baptist preacher. He was not New Thought. He was not New Thought in that level. But okay, what makes Kenyon very important here is that E.W. Kenyon went to Emerson College, which is a metaphysical college, okay? And one scholar claims that it's pretty certain that he studied under Ralph Waldo Trine, who was a huge New Thought big league at that time, okay? And every historian with their fancy quill pen will say that it's without a doubt E.W. Kenyon studied fervently metaphysical New Thought books. And it's undeniable that he took those beliefs and tried to Christianize them. Okay. He didn't look, I looked at them and thought, oh man, I need to repent. I looked at that and I thought, oh, this is bad. This is unbiblical. He looked at it and said, well, how can I Christianize this? Because they're getting results. Here's another book I have here.
Again, you can get good results from a bad process, especially if you start dabbling in the occult.
Yes.
Because there is a real power there.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you tell me as a Christian, what you would do if you went to, I don't know, let's say a Unity Center. Say you went to a Unity church service and somebody's in a wheelchair and they go to the front. Somebody prays for them. And they get healed. What would you do with that?
Yeah, you might go, wow, this is real stuff. This works.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, it validates. Exactly. So you understand that process of, there was a miracle performed, which means it's real. And nobody ever, you know what? A lot of people in New Thought, they quote Matthew 7:7, but what they don't like to quote or even ignore maybe is the rest of Matthew 7, where Jesus is talking about false prophets and he's talking about false signs, wonders, and miracles. And he's like, begone, I never knew you. You know, it's like that does happen. So what he did is that he saw these results that were coming from this movement and the prosperity teachings, the health. Okay, that's really where New Thought started. It was called the Mind Sciences, where the fathers and the founders of New Thought got healed. Okay, they believed that it was through right thinking that you heal your body. And this developed, and this got really popular. And the fact that you could heal yourself through your thinking became a very great alternative than going to the doctor and having like leeches thrown on you, right? I mean, there was very, very archaic ways they did things.
Right.
Yeah. And then you had prosperity, because the idea is that if God is good, he wants good for you. Those beliefs of prosperity and how that version of God came from New Thought first. So Kenyon's reading all these things and he's like, wow, this works. how can I use this for the church? And I'm staring at a few of his books right now that I use to research this chapter. And it's very demonstrable that he took these teachings, he read this, and instead of saying, oh no, stay away from this, he tried to find a way to Christianize it and to transfer it over in a Christian setting. And it worked.
Who else? Let me throw some names at you. And
Sure.
if you don't know, you don't know. I don't know. I just suspect.
Oh yeah, that's right. I had a list.
Okay. Here in Charlotte, there's a guy named Stephen Furtick.
Oh.
I don't follow him closely at all, so I don't know. But I suspect possibly. Is he a New Thought guy?
I believe he would be Word of Faith. Yeah. He is associated very deeply with Word of Faith teachers and preachers.
Okay.
He's had people like Caroline Leaf on, which I would love to do a deep dive on.
Okay.
But
see, I don't know. I don't follow him closely, but I've heard. So have you investigated him closely?
I would love to investigate him more closer.
No, but I mean, have you watched any of his stuff?
I've watched some of his stuff. Yes, I have done. I've not done a deep dive on him like I would like to.
Okay.
But from what I have seen and from what he is, I would put him in the Word of Faith category.
Okay. How about, there's a guy out and his name is escaping me right now, but I think he's out in Colorado Springs. Is it Charis Bible Church? What is the preacher's name there?
I've never heard of this before. Charis.
Maybe I'm pronouncing it wrongly. Forget it. I thought he might be New Age as well, because I know somebody that follows him that, thinks that his thoughts are going to heal him, that kind of thing.
There is a New Thought church in Lakewood, Colorado called Mile High Church that I really would love to visit. They're they're a little bit more secular. That? Yeah.
That's not the one I'm thinking of. Okay. How about, who else do you have in the book that you talk about? You talk about Hagin, you talk about Copeland. Hagin's gone. Copeland's still around. Who else?
All the big ones. You talk about people
Creflo Dollar, you mentioned.
Creflo Dollar. Yeah. I mean, these are pretty well-known Word of Faith preachers. Mm-hmm. And then you have the baton being handed to anybody really. You have Bethel Church. The Bill Johnson guy, right? Mm-hmm. So he would be in that vein. Yes, Bethel Church is anything that is, and this is what's hard and difficult, is that you have Pentecostals, like the Pentecostal churches, who don't agree with Word of Faith teachings. Okay. Like they fundamentally disagree and think that this is wrong or right. So I can't broad brush, all of them, but there are definitely ones that should pique our interest and be concerning. I mean, you have Todd White, you have Bill Johnson, Todd White.
Yeah, I've heard of him. Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
how about Paula White?
Oh yeah, absolutely, Paula White. Yes. Okay,
so going back to the Trump thing, then, because you had mentioned, was it a previous podcast where you mentioned that Norman Vincent Peale, or maybe it was earlier in this podcast, that Trump followed him. Mm-hmm. So following in Norman Vincent Peale's footsteps, he's long been dead, but Paula White is more of a Word of Faith person?
100%.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
And so it's like, once you know one, it's almost as if you know them all. People that might be under the radar, that might be, where people might read their stuff, whether they're older or new, or secular, or call themselves Christians. I mean, you have Tony Robbins. Robbins. Yeah. Yep. Oprah, Marianne Williamson, who's trying to get involved in government. Billy Carson, who's kind of blown up on the scene. A lot of the things he says are very New Thought. Our friend Wes Huff, he just blew up because Wes Huff is not the New Age guy or the New Thought guy. Wes Huff is the guy that talked to him in that debate, and he was just on Rogan earlier this week. Wes did a great job out there. He's a very solid apologist from Canada, so you want to check out Wesley Huff. So he debated this guy Billy Carson. We're going to get Wes on the program at some point, but he debated this guy, Billy Carson, which you can look up. And someone put in the comments, you shouldn't have done this debate because God says do not murder. Because it was so one-sided. That's so good.
And Wesley was just so kind to the guy, but he just debunked everything the guy said right out of the gate, this Billy Carson guy.
Wesley's brilliant. Yeah, yes. And he's the one who brought, because Wes helped before any of this. I go back, dude, Wesley Huff, it's like, I watch his stuff and I've been with him for a while, like friends with him. It's like the indie band that you've listened to forever that all of a sudden blows up.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny.
Right.
But yeah, he endorsed the book, and when in our interview, he was mentioning Billy Carson and how much Billy Carson is, he's very new age, but there's also these new thought beliefs that he's put on my radar, and I didn't realize just how much new thought he was. Joe Dispenza is a big one. On my personal radar is Caroline Leaf. Caroline Leaf is probably somebody who's wonderful, who has a lot of great teachings, but I am very suspicious about a lot of the things she says in the name of neuroscience and vibrations and frequencies and all these things about the power of your mind and your words. And I'm like, So that's just something to kind of keep on your radar. Deepak Chopra.
Of course.
Yeah,
How
Dr.
about the lady? Why is her name escaping me all of a sudden? Because I'm 63 now. I don't remember names anymore. Who is the lady that is on TV quite a bit and is kind of a very why can't I think of her name?
You are narrowing this down for me, Frank.
The lady that's very popular on TV. She's a preacher and she talks about enjoying life. That's her. What's her name?
Joyce Meyer.
Joyce Meyer. Yeah, Joyce Meyer. Like, where is she in this? Because I don't track with her.
Absolutely word of faith.
To be honest, I don't watch her. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I've seen clips. Is she New Thought?
Oh, she is Word of Faith.
Word of Faith. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and so that's the thing is that if I say Word of Faith, there is an infusion of New Thought. But I can't blanket it and say, oh, you're all New Thought.
Okay.
They wouldn't call it that way. I think they're very ignorant of their origins. I think that they do not understand because again, this is the fundamental deception is that it's made to look Christian. You take these concepts, and this is the argument from this camp is that there's a Christian version of this. Okay, they're getting results. That's the bad version. That's the occultic version. We're going to go over here and we're going to take this and we're going to use it for the church. We're going to take this and we're going to recycle it for something good. And to that, I just scratch my head at. I'm like, you want to go take occultic beliefs and use them for the church? But Melissa, but it works. Yeah, occultic things are supposed to work. That's the problem. Like, that's why you fall for this. If you're over here telling me that your words can create reality, go back from there. Tell me how that is a biblical concept only, and that's the other thing is that in this camp, there's a problem taking them back to the Bible because you can't put God in a box.
All right, one thing. The name came to me, Andrew Womack.
Oh yeah, he's Word of Faith.
He's Word of Faith, or with New Thought, like that. That's the guy out in Colorado. What's that?
Yes, they're all. Remember, when I say yes, they're Word of Faith. That equals because of the Word of Faith movement, and some of it. Remember, what makes it up is the Faith Cure movement, Pentecostalism, and New Thought. It doesn't mean they are inherently New Thought. It means that a lot of the teachings that a lot of Christians are very uncomfortable with, scratch their heads at, and think, but there's a Bible verse given with that. But I know it's not biblical. What gives? New Thought is what gives. That uncomfortable teaching that you're hearing is most likely from the New Thought line being drawn in Scripture, which is why I have to be careful not to blanket the whole movement as being fundamentally New Thought. So if I'm saying, yes, Andrew Womack is Word of Faith, that in your mind should equal, oh, okay, so these New Thought teachings have been transferred over. But I can't also say that they're not completely unorthodox. I think that would be unfair. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I know some of you are probably mad now that we're naming people. Newsflash, Paul named false teachers in the Bible itself. He named, I think, about 6 false teachers. He claims, Paul does, that to Timothy, when he writes Timothy, he says, watch your faith and doctrine closely. And James says anyone who is a teacher should not want to be a teacher because you're going to be held to a higher standard. That's James 3:1, a paraphrase. We are supposed to call out people that are teaching false doctrine. This does not mean that everything they teach is false. And they may be orthodox in many things, but any false teaching that pulls people away from the truth needs to be exposed. I'm remembering a pastor here in Charlotte who we've attended his church several times. And he came up this had to be 15 years ago. He came up to the pulpit one Sunday and he started naming people like Hagen and Copeland and Word of Faith teachers, and how what they're teaching is false. And he got a lot of emails that week. And so the following week, he got up and he started to speak, and he said, I got a lot of emails from you about how I ought not be naming people. I ought to just get up here and preach Jesus. And then he said, let me ask you guys a question. Suppose I got up here today and I said to you, I just discovered that there are people on our staff here at the church who have been introducing your children to drugs and pornography. What would be your first question?
Just preach Jesus.
The first question would be, who's doing this?
Yeah.
And suppose I were to say to you, I can't tell you who, but I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to preach Jesus. You would be furious with me, right?
Yeah.
The reason we point out when people go wrong is to protect the sheep, so you can be alert. Yes. You can say, hey, when I listen to this person, I've got to make sure that what I'm believing is really true. I've got to pick the bones out of this and just eat the meat. And if the person is too far gone, I ought not listen to them at all. So we're just pointing this. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, you know this just by thinking about one question, that the Word of Faith movement is teaching falsehoods. And that question is this: if having enough faith guarantees that you're going to be healthy and wealthy, don't tell me the apostles and Jesus himself didn't have enough faith, yet they were all brutally murdered. At least most of them were. They were beaten, tortured, and killed. They weren't guaranteed to have a cushy life and be healthy and wealthy by having enough faith. In fact, Jesus says, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. Paul says that if anyone who's a believer in Christ will be persecuted, you're not promised health and wealth on this side of eternity. And anybody that's telling you are is teaching a false doctrine. And that needs to be called out. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be wolves that chase away or we're supposed to be shepherds that chase away the wolves who are trying to consume the sheep.
And then you have Romans 16 where, Paul is talking about the people that are bringing the division are not the people with the sound theology. It's the ones bringing the unsound theology.
Exactly.
And so it's like, that's a little backwards. And I think it just makes people uncomfortable, and to bounce off what you were saying, the opposite of the prosperity gospel is not the poverty gospel. It's not like we're over here saying, it's pious to be, tortured and poor. I mean, that's not what we're saying. We're saying that there is no water in the prosperity gospel. How do you get to scripture? Like T.D. Jakes, he's another one. T.D. Jakes will say that Jesus was rich. And you can be too. Really? Where are you getting that from, TJ? Where are you getting that from? Because it's not the Bible. That has to be informed from something else. And so that's my argument, is that there's no way that this is better for you as a Christian. This will shipwreck your faith. This will make you have a belief system that you deny reality, and you're denying the power of God, ironically, because he is the sovereign. And the other argument I make is that, the decreeing and declaring, we talked about affirmations. The equivalent to that are declarations. That's another line that I draw, where you have the birthright to decree and declare prosperity and health and wealth. And by the way, why is nobody ever decreeing and declaring contentment, patience? You know what I mean?
The fruit of the Spirit, in other words.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Why is it always health, wealth, love life? Okay. Those are like the top three. And I'm like, you know what? Decree and declare for me humility. Okay. Go and ask God for the things that he strives for us to be. What are those fruits of the Spirit? Okay. And so that's the thing that I think I want people to think about and take away from is, where is this coming from? Does this feed your flesh, or is this something that is from God? Is this a gospel-centered message?
Well,
or do you have to deny it?
That's why my next book is 10 Steps to Humility and How I Made it in 7. Which is really
write
humble
a satirical book with that title.
It's really humble in me, because I actually made it in 6, Melissa. I'm just letting you know. All right.
I'm telling you, that would be a great satiric. I would co-author that with you, because I made it in 5.
But your name has to be bigger than mine.
Yeah, I was just going to say my name has to be My new
All right, well, the book is called Happy Lies, ladies and gentlemen. We've just, as we say, scratched the surface.
Yes.
The subtitle is How a Movement You Probably Never Heard of Shaped Our Self-Obsessed World. In fact, let me say this. I think what you've really pointed out here is there's a lot more meology in the church than good theology, at least in some churches.
Under the guise,
it comes from New Thought. So if you really want to delve into this, and you should, especially if you know somebody, friends, who maybe is following some of these Word of Faith teachers or other teachers that are shading the truth. And maybe it's totally well intended by them. Maybe they just don't get it. That's irrelevant. The main point is, are they teaching the truth, and are you believing the truth or not? Because you don't want to shipwreck your faith. You don't want to shipwreck eternity. You don't want to lead other people down the wrong road. You don't want to think God owes you something, and when he doesn't come through because he didn't really owe it to you, you go, well, there's no God then, right? That happens. Exactly. You know, people become atheists because they go to the wrong churches where they're promised everything and then they don't get it. And they go, well, there must be no God. I'm out, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, declaring all these things that come along with it. I mean, we talk about parenting a lot. And one of the examples I give is like, you would not allow your child to come up to you and demand that you give little snot-nosed Jimmy whatever he wants. Because he's decreeing, you got to have enough faith. You just got to you got to get in your parents' face a little bit more, Jimmy. Okay. You just got to have faith. You got to go up to them and yell at them a little bit more. You need to have more spirit in there. We would never do that. So why are we taking that and recycling that as a biblical concept, saying that we deserve that? There's just so many issues with it.
We kind of have an opposite way of looking at the scriptures in many cases, because the wise men brought Jesus, God in flesh, gifts, but we expect God to bring us gifts.
Ooh, that's good, Frank.
You notice that?
Yeah, that's quote worthy.
We're expecting God. Hey, God, you owe me. Come on, look how good I am.
Pastor Tarek over here preaching some truth.
Well, I hopefully I'm not preaching lies. You don't want to. You don't want to believe Happy Lies, ladies and gentlemen. Get the book, and then next Monday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, we're starting a brand new series live on YouTube. And it's called The Bible You Never Knew, Stories Stitched by the Hand of God. Bring your Bible. We're going to go deep. It's going to air live on our YouTube channel, 7:30 p.m. Eastern on the 20th of January. It happens to be Inauguration Day. Hope to see you guys there. Melissa, tell people where they can find you.
Anywhere. I mean, if you Google my name, usually it'll come up. But yeah, I'm on YouTube. I have my website, melissadougherty.co. Because I guess .com was taken. And then you have Instagram, Twix, Facebook. I'm pretty much found on all the platforms.
All right. Melissa Dougherty. Dougherty spelled Dougherty. We'll put all those links in the show notes, ladies and gentlemen. So check out all that out there. And please get this book before it comes out. Pre-order it, because it'll help move the book up the charts, which means more people will see it, which means more people will get it, which means more people will be enlightened by what needs to be read in this book. And hopefully it will take them away from shipwrecking their faith on lies. Again, the book's called Happy Lies. Melissa, thanks so much. You get a round of applause for this one.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I'll take autographs later.
Thanks for that humility. That was wonderful.
Thank you. 4 steps now.
All right. Beautiful. All right. Thanks, friends. Lord willing, we will see you here next week. God bless.
If you're looking for solid answers to life's biggest questions, don't miss the latest episode of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, iHeart, OnePlace, and Podchaser. Tune in, discover the truth, and share it with someone who needs it. Let's keep spreading the truth together.